think that I was just going along, had a business and a family, raising a family, you know, and just doing what I thought I was supposed to do, and that's really what brought us here. So, just doing what we felt was right. So, and I know my dad's the same way.
Yeah.
Anyway, so.
Do you go to the groceries? I mean, do people walk up to you in the grocery? I don't know. Is that weird?
Yeah. Pretty much everywhere we've gone, people have said something or noticed or something. But it seems like no one's been rude, huh?
A lot of people just look at him like,
Is that really him, or yeah?
They're not sure if they should say anything. You can tell you there's a hesitation.
Oh, yeah.
Say something, or is that him? I don't know.
Well, we were at that, you know, pretty much everywhere, well, most places we've been, there's been somebody that's come up and said, you know, hi. I was at Costco the other day, you know, so.
Okay. All right, so I think we're just about live, so just so you know, you're aware. Just for the record, can I have you say and spell your first and last name?
Yep. Ammon Bundy, Ammon Bundy.
Perfect. So we were just kind of talking about how you kind of have been thrust into this becoming a political figure, even though you never really asked for it. And all of this kind of started back near Bunkerville in 2014. But really, this starts way before then. And can you kind of talk about just what was happening that led up to the 2014 altercation with the federal government?
Well, without going into like too much detail, basically there was heavy regulations from the Bureau of Land Management, which is a federal agency, upon the ranchers in our area, and they began to feel that this, you know, regulation that was so heavy upon them that it was going to put them out of business. And then there was again some changes in the, you know, administration, and the policies and regulations just got more and more strict. And the local district there, the Bureau of Land Management District, really became oppressive to the point where it was very obvious that they were trying to put the ranchers out of business. And for example, there was a sign on the in the office, the BLM office there, that said "No moo by 92, cattle free by 93." And my dad and other ranchers, you know, obviously took offense to that, and began to try to understand their rights, where their rights came from, you know, what right they had to be on the land, because these are generational ranchers. I mean, for example, my family has been ranching in that area now for 141 years. And so it's not like it's just a new thing. And, you know, after a tremendous amount of study and research and communication with the other ranchers and so forth, and attorneys, and, you know, just a tremendous amount of study, my dad and a few of the other ranchers came to the conclusion that, and it wasn't just them, it was a lot of other parties, you know, attorneys, constitutional attorneys and so forth, came to the conclusion, or they became aware of it, let's say that the federal government shouldn't be managing and controlling these lands in the first place, that it was unconstitutional. They did not have authority to do it. The Constitution, the charter between the states and the federal government, if you will, did not authorize that. And so after some time of trying to communicate that to the other ranchers and trying to get the other ranchers to stand, my father and another individual by the name of Keith Ney decided that they were going to stand on their original rights and fire the Bureau of Land Management. And so they did do that. And they actually basically said that you were poor managers, that you're managing our ranches right out of business, and that and my father said, I'm not going to pay you to manage me out of my business and my heritage. And so he fired him and stopped paying the grazing fees to the Bureau of Land Management. Basically what he did is legally he nullified his contract with the federal government. So he no longer was held under the contractual law that was between him and the federal government. And then then he began to ranch, and he originally started paying his grazing fees to the county because he constitutionally felt that if there was any type of government that should charge fees for the use of the common land, if you will, it should be the government closest to the people. And so, to make a point that he wasn't doing it for money, he paid those grazing fees to the county, and that's what started it.
And so what was the breaking point? What led up to the 2014 altercation with the government? What was that point where you decided, I need to step in here and I need to take a stance?
Well, so to kind of from that time my dad made the stand to the time that the Bureau of Land Management, well, it was the federal government with 5 agencies actually came down and put my family's home and ranch under siege. From that period of time, there was several things that happened legally and politically, but basically they didn't know what to do with my father, and so it was 20 years. They didn't know because he had put himself out of the contractual agreement with the federal government, and so they did not have any contract on him, so they couldn't pull him into court on their contracts. And so eventually they finally got enough force built up. They got enough they felt they had enough political power to do it, and then of course they run it through their courts, which is the federal government in a federal court, federal judges, federal agents, against a rancher. And so you know how that's going to go. And finally they felt they had enough, political power, enough, force. They had built their armies up enough and enough judicial power to go in and try to remove my father. And they came in full force. We know that now they had over 213 men that was there. They said they were a militarized type force is what they used. They used military type command systems, and basically came down upon my family with a military force in 2014. And they first took my brother, and he was standing protesting and filming their actions on the side of the road on April 6th. And they literally just beat him up and drug him to the ICP, which was their incident command post, which was a compound, really. It was like a military base almost. And they did interrogations through him all through the night. They took him to another jail and did more interrogations, and then finally let him go the next day. And that enraged the people, and that's actually what brought me there. I was in Arizona, just taking care of my business and my family. Of course, I'm watching the situation, being very, concerned about it, worried for my family about what they were about to do and going to do. But until they actually acted against my brother, there wasn't anything to do. And so we went up there and we began to protest their actions. And my dad told us that we were to do nothing as far as our family, that we were to do nothing but take care of our guests. He felt that there was going to be a lot of people that was going to come. He knew that the BLM, the federal government, he knew that they couldn't help themselves but to use force upon the people. And so we just basically, initially just sat there and provided a place for people to, camp, and tried to feed them, but then there got too many. We couldn't feed them. We had tons of water that was donated and bottled water. And so that's just really what we were doing. We were just kind of organizing a protest of these agencies using the force that they were using, and also seizing and destroying my father's ranch.
And so we've all seen the photos and, kind of guns that look like pointing back at each other. How did it escalate to that point?
Well, first of all, they came in and locked up the entire land. And they put snipers in, all the high points around the home. And also when the, protesters kind of set up a spot, they had snipers up around the protesters. And then on April 6th, they there was a group of community people from the community and my brother. They were standing on the side of the road. They began to threaten them. They also, the day before, a couple days before, they set up First Amendment areas, they said, which was just little corralled areas. They were literally that construction mesh, that orange, and they were just and they set 2 of them up, and they were out and way away from their operation, way away from the ranch, and they said no one can protest or exercise their First Amendment rights unless they're in those corrals. And that enraged a lot of people, you know. But they began to enforce that. That's why they literally attacked my brother, because he was filming them, and he was standing on the side of a state highway, on a state highway right-of-way, so there shouldn't be any question of jurisdiction there. And they came, just a bunch of, you know, armed agents just came and beat him down, and they had dogs and everything else and hauled him off. And so that enraged people, you know. So now we're starting to get some people coming, more and more people. So then on Tuesday, so that was on Sunday, then on Tuesday there was a couple young men that were just going down a dirt road down to the river, didn't realize what was going on, or, you know, whether they did or didn't, I don't know, but it appeared they were just going down to the river. And then they were surrounded, and, you know, family members and so forth were concerned and got involved, their families. And so that happened, and then on Wednesday, so they just continued to press, and there was other things going on that we didn't know at the time. You know, people were getting pulled all over. They were confiscating, you know, guns. They were, you know, just threatening people that were just out on the land, just community people. And so that was an escalation, and there was just a huge buzz of this force that was coming down upon the people. And then on Wednesday, there was a convoy of federal vehicles, mostly, I believe, Bureau of Land Management, but I think there was some Forest Service vehicles and so forth there as well, or National Park Service vehicles, I'm not sure exactly, but there was a convoy, and they were escorting a backhoe, or a dump truck pulling a backhoe. And they were coming out of the mountains, and the protesters could see that from a long ways away, because they're out in the desert. And this convoy, and they were escorting this, so there was like 7 or 8 vehicles in front, and then, you know, 5 or 6 or however many vehicles in the back, and this dump truck pulling this backhoe, and everybody's going, well, what in the world are they doing up there with a backhoe and with a dump truck? And we'd also knew that they were gathering the cattle. We could see them gathering the cattle with helicopters, and they were pushing them really hard. We knew that they were, you know, had to be killing some of those cattle. And then we also knew that they were separating the baby calves from their mothers, and they had to have been just leaving them out in the desert. And so we kind of suspected that that truck was either, you know, like a rendering truck. But then we also saw that they had torches and, you know, other equipment in the back of their trucks. And we also wondered if they were up there like destroying something, like cutting something like our corrals or our water tanks and water system. And so we were wondering that. But I was actually just cooking hamburgers for the guests. It was almost a little before lunch. So they decided that they were going to go down there and protest them as they come and ask them if they could what they were doing with the dump truck and the backhoe. And as they came down onto the main road where the protesters were, they were just holding signs and just, you know, protesting. And but this time, which was different than the times before, they decided, the Bureau of Land Management decided to stop and engage the protesters. And why they did that, I still don't know why. You know, they got their dogs out. I mean, I have my suspicions, but anyway, they began to get out and protest engage the protesters. And I saw that up there. I was about a quarter mile away, and I was concerned for the protesters, so I got on my four-wheeler and went down there. And you know, right around that same time, they had taken my Aunt Margaret. She was 56 at the time, and they just literally from behind, you can see it on video, you go there, they body slammed her and just threw her on the ground, and that enraged the people. and they began to really heavily, protest and say, "What are you guys doing here?" And then the dump truck came around, kind of because it's dirt road, so it took a long time for the dump truck to get up here. And I pulled my Fuller up in front of it and stopped the dump truck. And I got out, and then they tased me a couple times, and you see the video. And then I climbed up in the back of it to see what was in the back of it. And then kind of we pulled off and so forth, and then they ended up leaving. And that was, so that video, people saw it, and it went viral. I mean, I think within just a few hours there's over, I think 1.3 million people have viewed it just in a few hours. And and people were not okay with what happened with Margaret being thrown down, with the tasing, with what they were doing with the backhoes, how they wouldn't respond to us, how they had their dogs. They were threatening that they were going to stick their dogs on us and so forth. There was a lot of mixed emotions about that, but that caused a lot of people to come from all over the country. And then, I could go on. On Thursday, there was a couple boys and young men or so forth in Overton, which is just this city next to us. There was a couple boys that were beat up and arrested then, and there was another older gentleman that was arrested, and so they just began to escalate until finally the people were like, "Look, we can't allow this to go on. We can't," and they just began to come from all over. And we were getting, hundreds and hundreds of people there, thousands eventually were there, until Saturday we had a rally. And one of the things that we were doing was trying to call on the sheriff and the local governments, the governor and the sheriff, to come and protect us from what was happening, protect the rights of the individuals, protect us from them, their abuse to us during protesting, and they wouldn't. So we were really heavily calling on the sheriff on Saturday to come and address the people, and he did. He came and addressed the people. There's video of that, but then he basically said that, yeah, they're going to end the operation, they're going to leave, but they're going to keep the cattle, and the people were like, well, what are you going to do with the cattle? And they wanted the cattle to go back on the range, go back to my family. And so they kept asking, over and over, basically, what are you going to do with the cattle? And the sheriff wouldn't respond. Mm-hmm. And so they, it's all on video, so it's not like, we can't. But eventually we ended up going up to the ICP, where their compound was up there, and began to protest them. But what we found up there, that it looked to us that they had no intention whatsoever in leaving. They were barricaded in there. They were getting ready to basically, they didn't look like in any way that they were going to leave. And so that's what put us in that scenario up there underneath that freeway. And then we were down in the wash just protesting them, and that's what put us there. And we thought, we were under the impression that they were leaving. The sheriff had told us they were leaving. We had heard there was they had put out a bulletin on their website that they were leaving, and then we go up there and it looks like in no shape or form that they were leaving. And we found out later that in the evidence that was one of the things that they were going to do. They were going to say that they were leaving and then not leave. They were going to say that they were going to leave, then everybody would kind of leave and go back to their homes and this and that, and then 2 or 3 days later they would start the operation again. And it's in the discovery that was one of their plans. So that's what put us there.
So it seems like you're very, very against the way that they treated you and your family and kind of the tactics that they went to go about it. Do you have any kind of understanding of what the federal government was thinking during that time?
Yeah, the federal government claims that they own the land and the resources. And they claim that the people, the local people in the states, they don't own it. And they want to treat this land as private property, their private property. So they say that we own it, we could sell it, we could profit from it, we could lease it if we want. We could evict you, we could fine you for use of it. We could close all the roads off and not let you use it at all. And that's the position that they've taken. And it's incorrect. These lands are public lands, and the federal government doesn't have any jurisdiction over them. So what they were doing is very clearly, in their view, they were trying to enforce their private property rights. And the people were saying, no, this isn't private property. This land belongs to the people. And the local people have more right to these land than anybody. And we've been using it for 140 years. So, I mean, that's a really good question. I think that to try to use the perspective of maybe what they were doing, in their eyes, they were enforcing their private property rights. And we were protesting that.
Do you believe that the federal government should be able to own land?
No, not at all. Not outside the boundaries that the Constitution has set on it. And so, when I say no, I guess I need to clarify myself a little bit, because in this country, we already decided 200 and plus years ago, we already decided that the government doesn't own anything, that the people own it, that the government are our representatives, and that we have a share as people in it. Say if there's something common, then we have representatives that take care of those. So as far as this idea that government owns something, it's actually contrary to the very founding principles that this country is built upon. So that's why I say that. However, there is a jurisdiction in which the federal government can control lands and resources, but it's very limited. The rest of the land and resources is supposed to go to the people. And if we are to have common land, there is no place for it to be among under federal jurisdiction. The Constitution makes it very clear that if the federal government is to own land inside a state, that they are, or to control land, really it's not own because it doesn't say own, if they are to control land or have jurisdiction over land and resources inside the state, and actually the term in the Constitution is property, so if they're to control property inside the state, they have to get consent from the state legislatures, meaning the state legislatures have to vote on it, and they have to say, okay, look, we're going to cede jurisdiction over to the federal government of this very little piece, right? And then the federal government has to purchase it, meaning they have to pay for it. So whoever owns it, they have to pay them for it. And then they can only use it for the erection of forts, magazines, dockyards, and other needful buildings. And which is basically for the reasons in which the federal government has authority to act. And the enumerated authorized purposes in which we have the federal government. So hopefully that makes sense. So basically, they're very limited on what lands and resources or property they can own inside a state and control.
So kind of to simplify this, you don't believe that the government is necessarily following the Constitution when it comes to federal land. Is that correct?
I don't believe it at all. I mean, there is no way that when you look at the history, you look at when the federal government was organized, which is what the Constitution is. The Constitution is the organization of the federal government. When the charter, when you look at that, there was no way that the intent of the founders, the drafters of the Constitution, there's no way that the intent was for them to own and control mass amounts of land inside the states. It just is not. It is completely contrary to the founding principles in which this nation was built upon.
And so while people are saying your father wasn't paying the grazing fees, this was the federal land and they're breaking the law, what you're really trying to say is, look, what we're overseeing as the laws are wrong based on our Constitution.
Yeah, well, there's the law, right? And then there's the regulations, and then there's, like, for example, agencies' statutory laws, and they don't coincide with each other on these issues, and they're completely contrary, and that is our argument. I think you articulated it quite well, that these lands and the resources belong to the people of the state. They belong, and they should be administered by the people of the county, by the county, and that there are individuals who have rights to these lands that were established over 100 years ago, and they have vested property rights, and those need to be protected.
Okay, so I want to take us back to kind of to Bunkerville when the authorities kind of said, okay, all right, we're going to back off. Did you think that as a victory, or did you see charges coming down the road?
No, I didn't see charges coming down the road other than, some, like Harry Reid said that this isn't over. They were trying to craft something that didn't happen. You could kind of see that. I could also see them, on the social media trying to sway the public against us so that they can, demonize us, and therefore they can go and do what they want with us so the public wouldn't support us. But as far as like knowing and understanding and seeing what we went through, I didn't see that, really clear. We, felt certain things like moving here that made it to where it was much easier to go through this, or at least, put my family in the right place to be able to, endure the things that went on. So, but as far as knowing and seeing what they were doing, no, not really. We believed, and we still believe today, that we did what was right. I mean, very much believe that. And now 2 courts have agreed with us.
So then everything was quiet for a little while, and then all this stuff with the Hammonds.
Correct.
How, because you personally didn't know the Hammonds, how did you get involved with that?
Well, what happens when we moved up here, again, I'm kind of, it was pretty chaotic with what happened at the ranch. We move up here, trying to kind of get a little bit of peace and, just kind of get our family out of the city and so forth. And we're really enjoying being here, enjoying the community, and just life was getting really good, again. And then I saw a couple articles and so forth about the Hammonds, and I knew what they were doing. I knew they were doing the same thing that they did to my family. And then my dad and I would talk every once in a while, and he was like, do you know anything about the Hammonds? He was really concerned, that what was happening to them was the same thing that happened to us, and he was concerned for them. And so that thought was in my mind, and he kind of wanted me to learn more and so forth. And I was actually kind of pushing it off because I was like, we have our own battle. We're still fighting to try to keep our family safe and all of that. And then I'm laying in bed getting ready to go at the end of the day. It's probably 10 o'clock at night, and my phone, there was a chime on my phone. I pick it up, and it was a link, and I clicked in it, and it was a link on the Hammonds. And I began to read it, and it's really hard for me to explain, but I felt this just inner urge, almost a direction to get involved. It was very strong, and I believe it was a spiritual thing that I was supposed to get involved and learn. And I couldn't sleep that night, it was so strong. And so I began to research everything I could about the Hammonds. And I researched and studied, and I did come to the conclusion, I believed that what was happening to them was very similar to the same thing that happened to my family. And that the federal government had come vindictively against them, trying to remove them from their lands so that they can take control of them. And that they had done the same thing to many people in Harney County and other counties as well. So, let me make a long story short, I went out and visited them. I found that they were the salt of the earth type of people, and that what was happening to them was, egregious and an atrocity. And so I tried to get the local governments to stand up to them. or stand up for them and against the federal government. And really, it was very simple, and people might misunderstand what we were doing there. All we were doing was asking the state and the county governments to put together an evidential hearing board, to just look at the evidence of the abuse to this family, and to determine whether the federal government was acting appropriately or not. I mean, we have to consider that maybe there is a possibility that there could be misconduct in government. We have to consider that not every situation the government is going to act correctly, especially when there's so much on the line when it comes to and that they might be vindictive towards a family or towards a group of people. We have to consider that. And I asked them to consider that. And I gave them evidence. I gave them all, a full list of grievances, and they just ignored it. They just acted like the Hammonds meant nothing to them, that the voice of the people, which we had tens of thousands of people that were, sign that petition, sign that grievance, and they just ignored it, completely ignored it. And, we found out later that it was the FBI that was telling them to ignore it. And I always go back to John F. Kennedy's quote, and I'll see if I can quote it. And he says, those who make peaceful revolutions impossible make violent revolutions inevitable. And what was happening there is they were not allowing the republic form of government to act properly, which is meaning the power's in the people's hands. They grieve their governments, their local governments, and those local governments are supposed to react and supposed to act and defend and stand as a barrier against any form of oppression. And the federal government was keeping that system from happening. And it just left the people frustrated, completely frustrated. Like, how dare they not respond to us? How dare they not at least look into this situation, at least consider that maybe something, was happening here? And it was so obvious that what they did to the Hammonds. I mean, there was a tremendous amount of research that was done to expose what they did to the Hammonds, and no one would respond to it. And so something had to be done. We couldn't just go home. We couldn't just literally just say, okay, you've ignored us, the Hammonds are going to prison for the second time. There's a tremendous amount of abuse going on here in this county. The economy has been destroyed. At one time it was, the wealthiest county in the state. Now it's the poorest. Okay, we'll just all go home and let you go ahead and do it. And we couldn't do that. So we found the best peaceful way to protest that we felt. And we went into the refuge. When they weren't there on a holiday, weekend, and we began to protest the actions of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the Bureau of Land Management, the Forest Service, and all that they had done to that county, including the Hammonds.
And so, multiple times at Malheur National Wildlife Refuge, you were saying, this place is a mess, we're going to leave it better than we left it. Do you feel that way today? Do you feel like it was left better than you got there?
Absolutely. I know it was, even though they tried to say otherwise. We did maintenance. We fixed, doors and the walls. We took care of it. And it was interesting because they tried to say otherwise in trial. And they brought up all these pictures of just this mess of all the rooms just like ransacked and so forth. And then we began to question the witnesses that were bringing those pictures in, which were government witnesses. And we found out that that mess was caused when they went and did their investigations. Because people left, because they got scared because of what they did to Lavoie. So people left, and they left their bags, and they left, personal. And then the investigators, the FBI, came in and literally just, when they went through their bags, they just threw the stuff everywhere and literally turned it upside down and just ransacked. And they wanted to say we made that mess. And it was just not true. You know, you've seen in the movies, you see, you know, what they'll, you know, what investigators come in, they literally dumped all the drawers out, so, you know, and took, and, you know, all the, you know, the coverings, they unzipped them all and took them on, and then they blamed that on us. It was not that way when we left. It was not that way when we were there. We were clean. We were organized. We were taking care of that facility, maintaining that facility, and for them to do that was just another show of the deception that they're trying to use to demonize us. However, when the jury saw that and understood that, they were offended by that, and it was one of the things that played a part in acquitting us.
You brought up Lavoie earlier.
Mm-hmm.
That's obviously a very controversial subject for a lot of people. Have you seen the video, and what do you think about it?
Yeah, I've seen the video, and it's difficult for me to speak on that because I know where we were going. We were headed to a meeting that we were invited to in Grant County, and we were going to speak at that meeting, and we meant no harm or threatened nobody, and we were literally ambushed, and I was there. I don't know, you know, I was there. They came from out of the trees and they ambushed us. We didn't know who they were. We didn't know what they wanted, and then they began to shoot at us, you know, without any provocation. We didn't provoke them to shoot. They voluntarily and openly shot on their own, and put us in a state of fear that we didn't know really what to do. We thought that they were going to kill us, and Lavoie took off and drove, and they began to shoot at him, and you know, they shot at him clear up until he got to the road stop there, and when they got stuck in the snow, they continued to shoot at him, and he left the vehicle, and by him doing that, he drew the fire away from him, and I believe saved the lives of the other individuals that were in the vehicle. And my brother was shot in the arm, and I just asked, what did we do that was so egregious and so criminal that they would ambush us on the side of the road going to a community meeting? Why would they do that? They murdered Lavoie. They killed him for no reason. He was not a threat to anybody. And then, of course, we know that they tried to cover it up, that they shot. We know that the FBI tried to blame it on the Oregon State Police officer. And there's been a whole bunch of things that will come out, and the people will see that, again, it was tremendous misconduct. And it was a group of people that have been training for many years to use their weapons on other individuals, and they thought that this was their opportunity to do it. And they did it. They did it inappropriately, and I believe that I know in the end that there'll be some justice there, and that the people will see the truth.
So you're saying that before Lavoie took off in the car, that they were already shooting at him?
I'm not saying that. That's established fact. They shot while before anybody even got out of the car. If you remember, Ryan Payne got out of the vehicle. They shot once before he even got out of the vehicle, and then they shot several other times on the way. And I just want to remind your audience, why won't they let anybody see that vehicle? Why have they confiscated that vehicle and not allowed anybody to see it but them? And, you know, they indicted one of the agents, the FBI agents, for lying about shooting and for covering up the bullets. But we know there was many more involved in that. And we haven't got all the truth here. And until we do, it's pretty hard to make a conclusion. But those are facts that I can tell you. They were shooting at us before. They had no reason to be. They were shooting at us while he was driving. They shot after he was stopped, and never once was a gun pointed at him. There was no threat from us, nothing. We had a laptop, projection system and a PA system getting ready to have a meeting in Grant County with the people of Grant County that they invited us there to. And those are some facts that people can chew on.
Do you believe, you knew Lavoie, you were there with him every single day. Do you believe that he reached for that gun after being shot at?
Not at all. Well, there's even question whether he had the gun. Mm-hmm. You realize that. And whether he even had a gun. Because one is, Lavoie wasn't the type, there was a pocket that was sewed, because he had a denim jacket, there was a pocket that was sewed inside of his, and they said he had a gun in there, and that just doesn't even make sense. But anyway, if you look at the video, he goes down like this, and then he goes down like that again. Well, he's being shot. And the first one, you hear, there's a less lethal weapon that appears to hit him in the hip. And of course, he's going to respond to those. And then they use that my opinion is they use that excuse to shoot him. And I believe that the truth will come out on those matters, and I believe that he was, viciously killed, and there was no cause for it.
They've said that he did have a gun, but the FBI has also been indicted for lying. Do you believe that could have, essentially, is what you're saying, that if they're going to lie about shooting bullets, why wouldn't they lie about a gun as well?
Well, look what they did too during our trial. They willfully lied. Of course the judge doesn't say a lie, because some reason in the courtroom you don't say a lie. But willfully, misrepresentation, deceiving the court, all those things are ways of saying you lied. And that's why our case down in Nevada was dismissed, because of the lies of the FBI and the lies of the U.S. prosecutors in trying to fabricate something that didn't happen. And I do believe that happened up there. I'm certain of it. I'm certain of it. But there's much more that needs to be uncovered, and I believe in time it will.
What makes you say that?
Well, that's the pattern. And I believe eventually all things will be uncovered, because I believe in God, and I believe that all wrongs will be made right. I believe that's what justice is making wrongs right. And it just appears that eventually someone will tell the truth. Someone will either, for whatever reason, they'll tell on somebody else, or it'll get to them, or something will happen, just like it did, I don't know if you read the Wooten letter from Larry Wooten about all that they were doing to our family and the prosecutors were doing and so forth. That type of stuff always comes forward. It might take several years. It might even take several decades. But the truth will come out. And I am certain that we will see this plan to provoke, this plan to use force, and this plan afterwards to cover up and to the evidence and to put blame where blame should not be. And I'm certain of it. I lived it. I've lived it at the Bundy Ranch. I lived it in Oregon. I saw what they were doing. And we already have evidence that they were covering things up. And I think there's a lot more.
So they arrest you. They take you into custody. What made, because you were the person who said, look, this occupation at the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge needs to stop. What made you make that decision?
I knew what they were, obviously we knew what they were capable of. But I also didn't, at that point, I didn't see the benefit of continuing, and that was really the reason why. I didn't see the benefit of continuing under those circumstances to continuing the occupation, if you will. And then I could see that those individuals that were there, were in grave danger. And so I felt that the best thing to do at that time was to say, hey, go home. There's a lot to figure out here. A lot of people have seen and understand why we were there. And so let's not lose any more lives over this.
Were you relieved when you found out that everyone did eventually leave, and safely?
I was relieved. Well, I wouldn't say safely, because those people were taken right to right to prison and suffered tremendously. And this idea that the federal government says, oh, we want a peaceful resolution. Their peaceful resolution is to throw us in prison and keep us away from our families the rest of our lives. I mean, the idea of that is just nowhere peaceful. And so it didn't happen, peacefully. It didn't happen, and they weren't okay. I just wanted to make that point. But I was glad that they were still alive.
So they arrest you, you're there. I mean, you're potentially facing decades in prison.
The rest of my life. The minimum charges just in Nevada would have put me over 100 years old before I got out. 106, I think. And so yeah, we were facing those charges, those serious charges, as the prosecution would say, serious charges. But so.
What was that feeling like, knowing from just trying to see it through your eyes? You feel as though you're just protecting your family and your rights and the people that you know and love, and now you're facing decades in prison. I mean, what's that feeling?
Well, I mean, one is, I want to explain the best I can that I knew what we did was right. I mean, I knew it was needed. And you can't just sit around and watch your family and your friends and your community and your freedom and your country go to waste. You can't do that. You have to, at some point, someone has to say, look, there has to be a different direction that we're going to go. And we have to bring attention to it. So, and I believe that I did the best I could under the circumstances and with the guidance that I was given, the inspiration that I was given. I believe I did the right thing. So I had that confidence in there. Now, even with that, they were threatening a very powerful government, most powerful government ever known to man, was threatening to take mine and my brothers and my father's and many of my friends' lives away from us and keep us in these horrible places for the rest of our lives. And that was hard. I mean, I was, I missed my family. I missed my wife and my children, my little babies. I didn't know whether I'd ever be able to get to hold him. And you saw Elias walking around here. I didn't know I'd get to play Tinker Toys with him ever again. And that was extremely painful. And but a lot of things happened that gave me enough hope and enough faith that we would get home. And that began to build and bring me hope. And then I began to be very confident in those things, those promises that I felt were given, and just helped me get through that time. So,
the verdict of the first trial comes down. Was that shocking to you?
Well, I don't think shocking, because I was at peace. At that point, I was really at peace with whatever happened. But about a day before the verdict, because remember it was like 5 or 6 days in deliberation, and I began to, about a day before they actually came out with the verdict, I began to feel a lot of peace and that we did the best we could, and that that whatever was going to happen was going to happen. I felt at peace. And so when the verdict came down that we were acquitted on all charges. It was just that kind of that continual piece, and so I wouldn't say surprise was it, but I was extremely grateful and thankful for that. So now I know you're cold, so I'm going to shut this door. Sorry.
It's okay. Oh no, it's okay.
I know. I just got up. Sorry, I can see you.
Okay. So you've got to be feeling pretty good. This judgment comes down. You're acquitted on all charges. You got to be feeling really good, and then they arrest you again.
No, that's not how it happened, actually, because I never left, and I was indicted in Oregon, shortly after I was arrested, and then about 45 days later, I was indicted in Nevada, and so, basically, I fought my case up in Oregon, and then I was acquitted by a jury up there, and then I still had over 100 years worth of charges down here in Nevada. So I never left custody.
So you knew once that verdict came down that there was more ahead of you, is what
Yeah,
you're saying.
I knew I had to go now to Nevada, that they would transport me to Nevada, and I would have to go through it all over again. And yeah, that was difficult to do, just to know that we had won, but now I had to go down and fight all these charges. And we did it in max security. I spent a tremendous amount of time in solitary confinement, and but again, we fought through it. We knew that what we did was right. We knew we did it for the right reasons. We didn't do it for our own personal gain. We didn't hurt anybody doing it. We started, putting together the evidence of all the discovery and everything in there while we were in prison the best we can under the circumstances we were in, and began to prepare for another battle. And September it came. We finally got to trial after almost 2 years, got to trial and began to fight and get the evidence in front of the court, in front of the jury, and the government did a bunch of unethical things before, during, and after the Bundy incident at the ranch there, and it began to get revealed. And finally, the judge says enough is enough, and she dismissed our case. And all of a sudden, now I'm free, just completely free of all charges, free of anything that legally that was placed upon me, and my brothers, my dad are, and then of course I've got 2 brothers that are still in another trial, and two other friends that are in another trial, but I have suspicions that the same thing will happen to them, that it'll be dismissed, and we'll be free to go back to I am free. I'm free to go, I'm here with my family, my wife, and now I got to go back to work and just live and enjoy living in this great country.
Was there a moment during the trials, the second trial specifically, where you knew it was a turning point, that something was going to give way?
Yeah, I mean, again, we had seen and lived everything that happened at the ranch. And then we see the indictment, and it's literally 63 pages of lies. And I can't say that loud enough. I mean, they crafted just these lies that didn't happen. And we could see in the evidence factually and prove that what they said didn't happen. And so we were just kind of chomping at the bit, if you will, to get in front of a jury and be able to expose these lies and the truth. And so we were excited about that. But of course, they're going to fight to do everything they can to keep the truth out, because they have to. That's the only way they can keep the narrative and keep the jury from knowing the truth, is keep it out. And so there's this battle in the courtroom to get the truth in front, and it's basically with witnesses. And we're battling back and forth. And the government is trying to say to the judge that we can't say that, and we can't bring that evidence in, and all of this is going on. And finally, there was one witness, and she was retired from the Park Service, the National Park Service, and she was there in a law enforcement capacity, is what she said. And we began to question her and cross-examine her. And we found out through that what the cameras were doing up on top of the hills. And because there was some high technology cameras that were basically surveillancing our home. And the government wouldn't disclose that those cameras were even there. And we were wondering why they wouldn't disclose that those cameras were there. Well, because those cameras tied it to the FBI. And there was no understanding that FBI was involved on that level. It also, those cameras tied it to the snipers that were on the hills. And it began to open up all of this stuff and this path of cover-up and that they were there to provoke my family and all of this other stuff. So that was kind of the turning point when she exposed to the jury and in an evidential hearing as well that these cameras were in fact surveillance cameras, that they were set up by the FBI, that there was a live feed, and that the FBI had snipers there, that the BLM had snipers there, and so on and so forth. And that was all a cover-up, and so that kind of broke it loose.
So the judge has said, the prosecution definitely mishandled this case. And I know this is a really tough question because you can't really know the answer to this, but do you think that if the prosecution would have handled it correctly, that they would have convicted you?
Well, let me answer this way. We were in almost a 2-month trial, okay? So almost, 7-8 weeks we were in trial, technically. And we had only gone through 3.5 of the government's witnesses. And so in 3.5 witnesses, we turned their full prosecution upside down. And the government had like 40 witnesses that was scheduled to come in. We would have loved every one of them to come in because we would have exposed the truth on every single one of them. And it would have never lasted 40 witnesses. And so we were so confident, and still today are so confident, that the truth would have come out and we would have been either acquitted or there would have been a hung jury. I do not believe that there's a jury in this world, that there's 12 people that would agree to convict us.
To the people who are out there who say, you're a terrorist, you just go out and provoke the government and you're causing problems, and people will say they should have just gone in when you were at Malheur and killed you.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what do you say to those people?
Well, I don't have anything to say to those people. I'm not going to argue with somebody. It's like me arguing whether Lisa's my wife or not. I mean, I know Lisa's my wife, and so I'm not going to argue whether I'm a domestic terrorist or not. I know I'm not. And there's just no room for argument for that. I mean, that's ridiculous. I live here in Emmett. I have 6 children, 3 boys, 3 girls. I went to high school at Virgin Valley High School in Mesquite, Nevada. I played football. I was a student body president. I have my own business for 20 years. I've had, over 100 employees. I love this country. I teach my children what the American flag means, the colors in the flag, that it stands for freedom. I honor those who have defended freedom in this country. So to argue whether I'm not a domestic terrorist is just something that I would never do.
And then on the complete other end of the spectrum, there's people who say, you're a true American patriot. Do you see yourself that way?
No, I see what we did as the right thing, as how we defend our liberties and freedoms. And when, I mean, let's just maybe consider history a little bit. And government becoming too big and out of control is what has destroyed the liberties of the peoples and taken more lives than any other entity in history. I mean, we could go down through it. Let's look at Russia. Let's look at Germany. Let's look at China. It's the governments that are taking the lives and the liberties and the properties from the people. So let's just consider that maybe we have to stand up against that and expose it when it's happening. To just consider that. And that's what we've done.
Looking on, do you see yourself taking any more stances anytime soon, kind of doing what you've done in the past?
Well, I know my wife doesn't want me to. I mean, it was very hard to do. It was very hard to go and support my father. I knew it was right. It was very hard to go into Oregon and to go into the refuge, but I knew it was right. And we did it for a very specific reason. And I hope now that there's enough people that are understanding enough, and that our local governments will begin to stand up and to say no to these things, to say no to the prosecuting families who have been on these lands for 100+ years, who have rights to them, prosecuting people that decide to stand up to the government peacefully. I hope that they say no to government so that the people can be protected, and so that we can continue on in this great land as a free people and continue to govern ourselves by the voice of the people, and so that our children and our grandchildren and ourselves can be free and enjoy life as we have in this country prior to this time.
One of probably the most questions that people want answered is about your father. Will he continue to graze land on federal, or graze his cows on federal land, and does he plan on paying fees?
So my father does not graze cattle on federal land. He is grazing cattle on the land, on the rights that he owns. They're deeded with the state of Nevada. They're very clear. So the question is not will he. The question, there is no question. He is. He is using his rights as it has been established, as we have for the last 140 years, and he will continue to.
And paying the fees, they've said he owes more than $1 million. Do you think he ever plans on paying those?
Well, again, I'd hope that the conversation had evolved to a point where we weren't talking about paying rent on property that we own, on rights that we own, because you don't pay rent on a home that you own. You don't pay. If you go and buy a home, and you buy it and you own it, you've paid for it, you don't go pay somebody rent for that. And so my dad absolutely has no intention whatsoever on paying rent on property that he owns. And he owns the grazing rights. If your audience wants to go to the Nevada Water Rights Registry, in the Nevada Division of Water Rights, and type in Cliven Bundy, go look. He has 11 deeded water rights, livestock watering rights. And you go into those water rights, and you can see it has a cattle count, which is how many cattle have been grazing on that area and drinking water on that water. And that is a very established deeded right. And my dad intends on using those rights, and he has claimed those rights. My family claimed those rights clear back in 1877 and have been using them. And he continues to do so, and he will.
You said the analogy about rent. yeah, we don't have to pay rent on houses that we own, but we do pay taxes. I mean, we do have certain fees that we do have to pay. I mean, do you see any correlation there, or do you see that as completely different?
Absolutely. But it's completely different because what the federal government is asking is not taxes. They're asking for rent. They're asking for a lease. And also, when you pay a property tax, you don't pay it to the federal government. You pay it to the county. And that's why my dad tried to pay the property tax that he called it to the county. But right now, even in the state of Idaho, you don't pay any property tax for water rights. You don't. There's lots of rights that are deeded, established rights that you don't pay taxes on. It's not something that we should get into to say, oh, just because we have a right, now the federal government gets to tax us for that right, or any government gets to tax us for that right. But if the county government decided that they needed, for some reason, that it was costing the county, money to administer those rights, and that they needed to be able to cover the costs of that administration, and so therefore there was a need to tax on those rights. If the county government decided to do that, my dad would be more than willing to pay taxes to the county, but they haven't. There is no state or county law that requires my father to pay taxes on those rights, and I don't encourage that they do. But if they did that, and they did it legitimately through the voice of the people, then my dad would pay those.
So again, kind of looking forward, obviously you didn't stand up and do all this to now sit back and be silent. So what changes do you want to see happen in the future to kind of validate your stance?
Well, again, these land issues need to be handled and controlled on a local level. And the local level that I see most capable of doing it and appropriate is the county governments. And that way, you and I, if we're living in the same county, we get a say on what happens to that land out there. And not somebody from Washington, D.C., 3,000 miles away deciding what's going to happen literally in your backyard. And that's not a republic form of government. That's not the right of local self-government. So these issues that are common issues when it comes to the land and to the resources, they need to be handled on a county level. So that's one. But two, there are individuals that their forefathers came out, generations ago, came out and took the risk of being killed, and they suffered, they worked, they bled to establish rights on these lands. And those rights were established, they were clearly established, they were lawfully established, and they've been passed down from generation to generation and those people that they've been passed down to have worked. Like my father, for 70 years, he's worked on that, 70 plus years, he's worked and lived on that land. And those rights are established, and they need to be protected. And they can't be taken away. And so I guess twofold, that the preemptive rights of individuals need to be protected. And also the common rights of the people on these lands need to be administered by the local governments and protected as well.
So you've got these ideals of what you'd like to see happen. Do you plan on trying to act upon them by the best way I can see doing that is going into politics? Any political? No,
I don't have any desire to go into politics. I've been approached several times. If I was to do that, it would be simply out of necessity. But I hope that those who have the desire and aspirations to go into politics, that they will go in for the right reasons, that they'll be honorable, and that they will do it to defend the rights of the people, and not to build government, not to do it for a specialized purpose or for just a small group of people, and that they will do it not to consolidate power into one body, but to distribute it to all the people, and so that they can live and prosper and enjoy and be safe in their homes with their families. And there's plenty for everybody. We don't need to be fighting over, you know, the scraps, really. But when you have an entity like the federal government coming into a state and controlling over 89% of its land and resources, it literally leaves everybody else just fighting over the 11% of the scraps. And that's the way Nevada is. And that's what these individuals should be fighting for the rights of the people, and to free these lands up, free the resources up, and many other things. But for the individuals, for the people, not for the government.
And then I think my last question is just, how's it been to be home?
It's been really, really good. I had this imagination, or this, I imagined, of what it would be like to be home. And it's been every bit of that plus. And I've just enjoyed it tremendously. This valley is a wonderful little valley. The people are wonderful. My children are wonderful and good, and they're excited to have me home. And my wife is wonderful. And she's been so loyal and standing beside me. And anyway, it's been great. I can't put it in words.
You got to celebrate Christmas a little
yeah.
late. And
well, I made it because I had missed the last 2 birthdays of my little boy and Elias. And so when my case was dismissed, I jumped in the vehicle and I drove, 12 hours or whatever it is. It's close to that. And I was able to catch the last 15 minutes of his 3rd birthday because I didn't want to miss another birthday. And I was able to hold him and wish him happy birthday. And there was a whole house full of people here from the community that came, and we ate cake and sang happy birthday to him. And I didn't want to miss another birthday. And I'm grateful to be here. And I know that a small, family like ours doesn't go against the federal government and prevail. And not just prevail, completely dominate without the help of the Lord. I know that we have been directed and guided and protected in these things, and I believe it's for a bigger purpose, so that we can, what's happened here can perpetuate into more and more freedom for people, and more and more prosperity, and so that people can enjoy living on these lands and prosper. So,
is there anything else you'd like to add?
I don't think so. I think you've done a great job asking questions, and I appreciate your questions. So,
Doug, is anything else you can think of? All right. I think we're